dominatory ambition. But regional conflicts, that is where we clearly see that Russia is having the ambition of winning such limited regional situations, and that is the threat posed to smaller allies at the front line, at the border between NATO and Russia, and again the Baltic colleagues, but also the nations of the Black Sea region, including Turkey, know something about this and will be perhaps even better qualified than I to discuss such threat in detail. And also it is the Russian capacity to constrain our ability to respond across the Atlantic. The threat of them blocking the communications and trade and reinforcement supply routes from America to Europe. That is part of the threat as posed by Russia and as assessed by us. Secondly, listing the key challenges and threats, China is a challenge already that has emerged gradually but consistently, and it is the growing ambition of China to project influence on a global scale, which, unlike in the case of Russia, is matched by vast resources, military capacity, and most importantly, perhaps, it is also driven by a combined political military doctrine, integrating various levers, various instruments of the Chinese state power and influence. And this all happens under the unified political command, so to say, of the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, these are no secrets, these are facts of life. And we can continue debating whether China is more of a challenge or more of an opportunity, but clearly some aspects of its behavior and the way or the ways it projects its influence pose for us the compelling need to respond, and that is again happening, and it is good that there's been a transatlantic debate on that, and also action, and there will have to be more of steps following. Personally, for me, it is rather a question of when, and perhaps not that much whether or if China will start confronting the West even more tangibly, going beyond the economic and political confrontation which we are already witnessing. And also, one cannot fail to mention the massive spying operations conducted by China against many, if not most, of allies. That's already ongoing. Some of us can tell stories about how their computer networks, state computer networks, have been compromised, penetrated by Chinese efforts, and we know that where Russia is able to employ hundreds of experts on hybrid and computer, I mean electronic spying and warfare, China is able to employ thousands, and it's also this sort of difference of the order of magnitude which makes the Chinese challenge more serious and more of a long-term and strategic nature. Also, I mean, the hybrid word must be mentioned. Hybrid, no matter how fashionable it is, it's nothing new under the sun. We know that hybrid methods have been employed for centuries. But in the Chinese case, again, the comprehensiveness and the system makes it a real issue. And that is why, again, there is, I think, no more need to convince various actors, partners, or individual nations of the need, because we share the need now, I believe, that we need to protect our critical infrastructure, primarily and principally the communications, including the 5G networks, also the key infrastructural and energy networks, and to shield it from control and by others. And in this case, China again is an actor which systematically works on acquiring control of exactly these networks, and in connection with the doctrine and system of theirs, this is a clear threat we have to counter by basically retaining the control of these networks by ourselves, and ceding it only to those who are certified and, in other and simple words, friendly and ideally allied. I'm not further elaborating on that. Again, I believe that some may want to return to these aspects, but of our challenges and threats. But I have to sound quite telegraphic. And one of my last 2 points have to do with terrorism, which has been repeatedly identified by the alliance as the principal asymmetric threat to face. And here it's obvious that failed states and bad governance are breeding ground for this threat of terrorism. Personally, and again, this is no government view, but I think that it's fair to share this personal observation of mine with you. I don't think that. First of all, one fully acknowledges the political and security imperative to fight terrorism, and that Turkey is at the forefront of the fight against terrorism. So no need to lecture you on terrorism as a phenomenon. But while we fully acknowledge the need to fight contemporary terrorism, and the bulk of it is driven predominantly and aspirations to in the Middle East, but also in Africa, for the reasons which again can be further elaborated. We see that the Daesh threat has had to be, and more practically so, or any other existing institution, And the same holds true actually for Mali as another example of several operations and several types of military presences do exist, which are to help the country to cope with the threat of internal or imported terrorism. And there, the French-led Barkhane Takuba operation is a demonstration of that reality. I mean, the EU would be certainly less able to agree to the concept of such operations, and more practically, it is a coalition of the willing, led by the nation most capable and concerned, and that is probably the model which will continue to be followed in comparable situations in the foreseeable future. And this is not to say that from my part that NATO should not have a role. In fact, we probably would, including myself, would all wish that NATO had more role in combating terrorism and developing more capacity for that. But again, I think that we always hit the political aspects and possibly the lack of consensus across the board for launching anything easily and collectively, and hence again the practicality of ad hoc coalitions. And fourthly and lastly, how we have gotten to where we are with the political challenges the NATO faces, and most of them are coming from within. I think that we have quite rightly and timely responded to the frustrations and risks, which, by the way, must please both the Kremlin and Beijing, which have been also further exacerbated by the policies by the Trump administration, and also by the lack of the Europeans' response to some of the justified expectations of the US. That holds true mostly for the defense spendings of many Europeans, and that has made us realize that there must be more open debate which about the political cooperation within NATO, which would hopefully reconfirm some of the fundamentals. And from that point of view, what the French president said in September of 2019, it may have sounded, and it did sound controversial. You remember the notion of the brain death of NATO in connection with Article 5. But I think that all of us actually have willingly agreed to the need of having the political reflection about some of the, including some of these fundamental aspects of NATO cooperation, to rethink it, and also to prepare for the debate which we will need to have anyway, and that is the one on the next strategic concept, because the one of 2010 has been widely recognized is outdated. In the meantime, a lot of things happened, and that is why the debate took off. The reflection has been conducted, and the report is now out there, and it's good that we have it. Of course, it remains to be seen what the Secretary General, which has been given the discretion, will actually do about it, how he will use it. But clearly, for me, and it's a very fresh document, I mean, in its public version, so I'm not sure that people have already digested it fully. I have not, I'm still trying to read it through repeatedly, but clearly there are points which will be very valuable and which will have to be taken on board in preparing for the next two summits, actually the one which is expected to task the elaboration of the new strategic concept, and then that should be the one of the next year, of 2021. Of the timing, I'm less sure, and then within a relatively short period after that, a year or so, we should have arrived at the new strategic concept, or no matter what label will be put on the product, but clearly we need this update on the political side in order to match the conceptual and strategic development on the military side, because that, in the view of some, including myself, has actually overtaken the evolution of the on the political side, and there's also this gap or this discrepancy which will have to be addressed. Partly it has been already grossly helped by the NATO 2030 report, the outcome of the political reflection, and now we have to continue on the governmental level in preparing for the next two summits, and this is also to appreciate the role of all of those members in the reflection group, including Ambassador Yildirim, and I'll be most grateful for any Turkish inputs, comments on that work, and also on what should be the follow-up to it, whether NATO or nationally or no matter how. So this is where I should stop. I'm afraid that I have already exceeded the allocated time, so my apology for that. But I hope that I've covered more or less what I thought I should, and I'm looking forward to taking part in the question and answer period. But most of all, I'm now looking forward to hearing the presentation of the Turkish views, knowing that Turkey has on certain issues specific views given by its strategic position, situation, history, and also geography. And I would leave you with one last thought, and that is that it is the importance of Article 5 and its central nature to whatever allied business, and this is also to assure you that this is very much recognized and reflected on the Czech side, and we have also valuable pieces of observations and positions contained in the NATO 2030 report on the centrality of both the Article 5 and of the transatlantic link, and I hope that this is also the way it is approached from the Turkish side, and all the more I'm looking forward to hearing more about Turkish views. Thank you.
Ambassador Maciek, thank you very much for this comprehensive perspective on Czech side. A country which joined NATO years later than Turkey, since 1952. Turkey is a member of NATO, and you are, in this sense, a newcomer, but in the heart of the Europe, you are a very important country. And as you indicated in your presentation, you said always that we are a small country, but what you do is a big job. So don't underestimate, I would say this, and say small is beautiful in this respect. And I learned a lot of the activities of Czech Republic within NATO and outside of NATO contributions. And also your membership into NATO is definitely one of the biggest events after the end of the Cold War, where you change, if you want, the sides. Before, forcibly, you have been on the Soviet side, but if when you were free, then you chosen the right way, which is NATO and NATO's Article 5, which is interesting. You indicated now how is going to be applied, whether it should be applied, common challenges, terrorism, international terrorism, and what is going on in Central Europe, Eastern Europe, from Ukraine to Russian position. All this have been very important for me and for our viewers to see a perspective from the heart of Europe, from Czech Republic. Thank you very much. It was very broad, comprehensive, and I thank you very much for this afternoon. We will have, of course, the migration, which is also another common challenge, not only for us, but also for Czech Republic, all Europe. It will be another interesting debate, of course. For now, after your, I would say, very, again, comprehensive perspective of Czech Republic, now we look from the Turkish side, from the flank country of NATO, together with Norway. But Turkey was, from the very beginning, supportive for the newcomers, like your country, into NATO. And who is going to speak about this? Not better than Mr. Ambassador Fatih Ceylan, who have been the Turkish representative to NATO, a long-year friend, who is expert on multilateralism. I remember, Ambassador, when you, before you went to Washington, D.C., to Brussels, we had a reception at the American Embassy in honor of you, and you spoke there. You said, I'm a man of multilateralism. And on these days, multilateralism is very much in fashion again. So what you said 5 years ago is now a real case to be debated. And you have experienced so many summits in recent years, a lot of challenges. You are the man who was in the kitchen, if you want, of NATO, representing Turkey, and many, many insights. You have many anecdotes. I know that you like to tell anecdotes. Not further ado, I would say now to complement what Mr. Ambassador Kovaček said, looking from this perspective, and then we will have a very good debate, I would say. You have, like Mr. Ambassador, 35 minutes time to speak, and then we will have a discussion. It will be a lovely discussion, I can foresee now. Please, Mr. Ambassador, welcome to our common cooperation with Czech Republic. And on behalf of Turkish Foreign Policy Institute, I'm very happy to have you here. It is an honor for us, like to have Mr. Kovaček. So it is the ambassador's talk, or the talk of the giants, I would call it. Please.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Bader. Once in the kitchen, never out. That's the motto. I'm talking about the kitchen of NATO, which I had spent quite a number of years. Well, let me first start by extending my thanks to my Czech colleague, Ambassador Vacek, both for participation in this seminal webinar, and also his comprehensive views from the perspective of the Czech Republic. He has made such a comprehensive presentation that I wonder what else I could add to it, actually. Let me try to follow a kind of deductive methodology, because from time to time, particularly nowadays, I think many people should realize what NATO means for their security and defense. Sometimes it's taken for granted. But latest events have demonstrated that this is not the case anymore. Why was NATO established in 1949? it was against the Soviet threat. That was the raison d'etre of the establishment of NATO. And I think there was a big vision behind it. There used to be visionaries in those times of duress, in the wake of Second World War. And I, as a diplomat, am still trying to see such visionaries appearing on the scene and set a solid and healthy course for the transatlantic community. There had been a number of inflection points in the case of NATO since its establishment. And it's commonplace to refer to the words of its first Secretary General, Bob Ismay. That is another perspective on the raison d'etre of NATO, keeping Americans in, Germans out, Germans down, Russians out.
Right.
Now, Germans down part is gone, was gone a long time ago in 1955 when Germany acceded to NATO. And it's still important to keep Americans in, and Russians will remain out for a long time to come, particularly after what happened in 2014 in Crimea and Donbass, which was followed by Russian intervention in Syria and also in Libya. So I think we should recall what NATO did for the security of its members since the start of the Cold War. And we should have a more elaborate view of the importance of the transatlantic community. Now, NATO is the sole organization where you can address issues of common concern for the transatlantic community. And in the last 5 or 6 years, I witnessed various occasions underlining the importance of solidarity and unity being the center of gravity for NATO and its activities, particularly in collective defense. But we should not be misled by the conception that NATO is solely a military organization. Some of our European partners would like to attribute only the military aspect of it, to NATO, collective defense, confine it to collective defense only, which is not the case. NATO is a political military alliance, and Ambassador Vacek mentioned about it. We are talking about shared values among member countries, which is extremely important. So it's also a big and solid shield for democracy, pluralistic democracy, liberty, and international law. I always tend to see the Washington Treaty in its entirety rather than dissecting it into different articles. Article 5 is certainly the backbone of NATO, there's no doubt about it, but there are other articles within the Washington Treaty to which we should all oblige. Another inflection point after the foundation of the Republic, countering the Soviet threat up till 1989, when the Berlin Wall was down, we had the post-Cold War period. There were serious discussions in NATO about what NATO should do after the downfall of the Soviet Union. But then we immediately confronted crises in the Balkans, starting with Bosnia-Herzegovina, which was later followed by Kosovo. So we needed NATO. And since then, the core tasks of NATO remain the same: collective defense, crisis management, and cooperative security. So these are the pillars of NATO. founded on the provisions of the Washington Treaty, and which are still valid. So we spent the post-Cold War period primarily addressing these crises in the midst of Europe, which was then seen as out of area. So the term was coined for such operations is non-Article 5 operations. That was part and parcel of crisis management within NATO. And it took a lot of time for a number of European countries to digest what was going on in the Balkans. There were certainly divergent views and divergent interests and competing interests. I mean, let's be realistic about it, about what was going on in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So it took 3 years for NATO to intervene in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Consultations began in 1992, and the decision to intervene was taken in 1995. It was not possible to take such a decision without the active leadership of the then US President, Bill Clinton, by the way. I mean, if left to Europeans only, it could have been impossible for NATO to intervene in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So that was the first kind of crisis management operation NATO conducted in the mid-90s, and also another one in late 90s, that's Kosovo operation, which was followed by another big event, another big inflection point in NATO's history, 9/11. The emergence of large-scale terrorism for all within the alliance. There had been different recipes recommended also for the alliance how to grapple with this imminent threat, which later confronted almost all alliance members. We suffered from it much before the United States did. In the early 80s, we were trying to convince our allies in NATO to develop a course of action, a plan of action to address this big challenge. It didn't find an echo that we expected from the alliance then, but after 9/11, things have changed. And the last inflection point was in 2014, March of 2014, when Russia occupied and later annexed Crimea and started destabilizing the Donbas region of Ukraine, which was later followed by the expansion of Russian presence in Syria with a highly effective military network. So the alliance, in 2013, just prior to Russian interventions in our immediate vicinity, when I say in our, I'm talking about Turkey's vicinity, of course, we were trying to formulate a headline, quote unquote, for the summit of the United Kingdom. And one of the popular terms was being prepared. And the main focus was Afghanistan. So when Russia intervened in Ukraine, like many others, the alliance was also caught rather unprepared because the collective defense part of the alliance, which constitutes the backbone of NATO, was rusty. Because many European powers, not Turkey of course, because of our geographical position and being in the epicenter of crises around us, many European powers decided to reduce their defense budgets and started benefiting from what was again a popular term then, peace dividend. Peace dividend from 1990s till 2014. Smaller defense expenditures, more focus on crisis management and cooperative security, and premises where there was no, I would say, large-scale perception of the evolving Russian military power. And then in 2014, there was another scene which introduced a challenge, and which still continues, by the way, emanating from Russia. So that challenge was termed as the challenge from the East. Another challenge that we discussed, which is still relevant and valid, is terrorism, which inflicted many lives, particularly in Turkey, and infected European countries as well. When I was a permanent representative at NATO, there were 2 bombs exploded in the midst of Brussels, and in Paris, in Istanbul, in Ankara, in many places in Turkey. So terrorism became an acute issue also for alliance members. Although there are different perceptions of how to tackle it, of course, I mean, it's the responsibility of each member country to counter terrorism, but we also need collective action, including NATO. And in 2017, there was a mini summit, and decision was taken, rather not the decision, but the plan of action was adopted by the heads of state and government at the mini Brussels summit in 2017. And there's still work going on that plan of action. I'm not sure whether all aspects of it have been implemented. We still need more resolve to address terrorism in all its respects, in all its forms and manifestations. So we were unprepared for such Russian assertive and aggressive action, challenging the international rules-based order, and how to deal with that. So the challenges from the East and from the South became the main concern of all alliance members. And they are still there. They haven't disappeared, and they will remain with us for the foreseeable future. Another important point, which is also equally important for Turkey, is for the alliance to continue with that 360-degree approach, encompassing all the areas within the Euro-Atlantic area and beyond it. That is important. When I got involved in NATO affairs, that was late 80s. that was our compass anyway, because Turkey had always been in the epicenter of crises. And as defense planners, I got reared in defense planning, by the way, in the military aspect of NATO, primarily. We had a 360, we had to have a 360-degree approach. And now I'm very pleased to see that NATO adopted it only after 2014. And that should continue to be the pillar on which NATO defense planning must be based. From time to time, there have been inner tensions as to, which priority, it's like prioritization between different challenges. But I think the important point and the main focus should be on keeping this 360-degree approach. And I'm also frustrated by the fact, as a former permanent representative, that not enough attention was given to this NATO 2030 report prepared by the experts group as a result of the reflection process initiated in December 2019 at London Summit. Very few headlines on it. It's a very comprehensive report, and it must be read in full. And aspects of it should be shared with the public at large. So I would urge all participants to have a look at it with the title United for a New Era, and read it carefully, which is also of importance for Turkey. When you read this report, of course, I shall focus on certain aspects of it. It's a long report, 67 pages, 138 recommendations included in it. And it's very important because that's like charting the course for NATO in the, particularly in 2021 and later up till the 2030s and even beyond. But we here in Turkey are preoccupied with other issues which seem more appealing to the public at large and tend to cast aside the defense and security aspect of life. So when we look at that report, I think it really and very effectively epitomizes the discussions within NATO. So I congratulate those people who got involved in preparing this report, including my dear intimate friend, Ambassador Tajani Dem. It's clear that Russia will continue to be the I would say the strategic rival of NATO. That is certainly the case. The China part of it is formulated in a very balanced manner, I would say. When you read it, it's written in the report that China is not a direct threat to Euro-Atlantic community. But then when you look at the recommendations, it talks about systemic rivalry, rising influence and power of China, also in the military and defense field. And when you read the recommendations as a whole, you will see that in my personal opinion, I think the formulation of the Chinese part is a compromise between the United States and the Europeans. It's like indirectly saying that China is a big, challenge, presenting new types of threats that could have an impact on Euro-Atlantic security, but we must follow how China will behave in the future. And there's, of course, terrorism as well in that report. The references to cyber warfare and hybrid warfare. These are important topics. These have been important topics. Cyber was adopted as the fourth pillar of operational planning. It's land forces, maritime forces, air force, plus cyber security. And another important aspect is, of course, these new and emerging technologies. For the last 5 or 6 years, that was an important discussion within NATO as how NATO can compete in the technological field vis-a-vis these new and emerging technologies. And the aim was to maintain the technological edge of the alliance and its members with regard to these new and emerging technologies. So this is a very important topic, certainly including artificial intelligence, robotics, nanotechnology, and other types of novel and emerging technologies. I mean, there is a division within NATO addressing this issue, particularly emerging security threats, new and emerging technologies. So we should continue to maintain our focus on that particular field as well. And last but not least, NATO-EU relations. That is another topic which has been among different matters addressed by NATO, particularly after the European Union launched its ESDP under CFSP then. Now it's called CSDP, Common Security and Defense Policy. So we are talking about the period prior to the Nice summit of 2000, and also, of course, the important Lisbon summit in 2010. Now it's from time to time, NATO-EU relations have become a subject of different interpretations and perceptions between the United States and those leading European powers. We are still there. Turkey has always been part and parcel of that discussion. What we would like to see is the fulfillment of what was written on many documents. But there must be a balance between NATO and the EU with regard to the participation of non-EU NATO allies in the EU work. NATO has always been much more generous in involving non-EU partners in its work and activities, which is not the case in the EU. That's been my personal experience throughout decades, I would say. And I think our European allies should have a refreshed view on how to do it. I'm very glad to see that this was also raised in the NATO 2030 report prepared by the experts group. But I mean, deeds are equally more important than words. So we should see things in practice by the EU with regard to the participation of non-EU allies, non-EU NATO allies in the work and activities of the EU. I think that would give an added value of the EU to achieve. And that brings to another heated strict economy. I follow Mr. Borrell, his statements, his meet the press meetings and what have you. And in one of his recent interviews, he said, let's not get worried about strategic autonomy. It's synonymous with lack of dependency. That's not satisfactory. I think there should be more elaboration on what the EU needs as an institution by strategic autonomy. Now that first resided in security and defense matters. And Mr. Borrell also admits that its origins come from this defense and security aspect, but now it's kind of, it permeates different activities and work of the EU. So I think the European, our European allies should address it more and try to give a clear definition of what they mean by strategic autonomy. I think that will also remain on the agenda of NATO and the EU in the foreseeable future. Well, let me conclude by thanking my Czech colleague once again for his comprehensive overview of the unfolding events, and Professor Bajce for organizing this webinar. And I think we should leave people
yes.
time to ask their questions. It's like Q&A period. And let's see what type of query you face.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I think from Turkish perspective, what we have described is very interesting because the NATO is very much debated in Turkey, also like in many European countries. What is the role of NATO? In particular, during the Trump administration, the transatlantic relations suffered a lot. We have a great damage. Probably this is the period now of improving or to reconstruct what have been destroyed in the last 4 years. But the important point is also that you indicated the Turkish-European Union relations. So the European Union as a security-minded institution on the way to become one. When the European Union security autonomy, probably there are some views, as Mr. Borrell probably indicated, and you said is not enough what he was
that's my personal
providing us. And it is exactly what today and tomorrow the European Union leaders will meet. I mean, after the Brexit, of course, European Union from security perspective getting weaker because at least 40% of European defense was depending on
80%.
Because the nuclear power, warships, and all this money what they put. And now the question is also where the European Union and the NATO relations will go. Is independent from Turkish position, how the transatlantic relations will be renewed, also including the Central and Eastern European countries. You said Russia will remain as a rival of NATO. This is a very important statement, and I would like to hear also Mr. Ambassador Kovacek's view about this. And he was indicating actually how it is important. China, you said, is not direct enemy or rival of transatlantic.
Direct threat. That's the word. It's not a direct threat to Euro-Atlantic security, but then it continues.
I correct threat. Threat is also a perception, of course. We academics, we love to talk about the enemies. It's easier, you know, to make much more hot and get more articles and books to be written about this. So this is professional, I would say, issue. But therefore, the issue is here Now, how do we go from now? We are at a certain stage of the history. Now, after the pandemic in particular, how the normalcy will be back? What means normalcy for NATO? What means normalcy for the European security also? This is also my question to our viewers to put their questions to both ambassadors with very interesting, comprehensive explanations, and I definitely personally learned a lot. And now, who is the first one?
Before that, Professor Bahçe, let me once again underline what I did in 2013 before I was assigned to NATO as ambassador. I'm still a man of multilateralism.
Very good. Professor Ansmaul wrote an article about German multilateralism in the latest publication of the journal Sirius, and every sentence when I read about multilateralism, I remember you, and you are right. You know, after 7 years coming back now as full of experience, NATO experience ambassador, we see how multilateralism will be now also American foreign policy orientation. So from this perspective, I'm very happy and honored to have you as a guest of our institute, somebody who foresaw what is going to come. So from this perspective, very great contribution, like Mr. Kovacek, who was also indicating about this. So I'm very happy with these two ambassadors' views and their interpretations. But now the viewers put certainly some questions. So who is going to? Yes, I see one. Evren Gönen is going to ask first question. Please go.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Havek, Mr. Ambassador, for your comprehensive and valuable presentation. And I'm wondering that the Czech perspective on what's your comments on the dispute in the Eastern Mediterranean and NATO mediation efforts in the region? What's your comments and what's the Czech perspective on the region? Thank you.
Okay, this is one. There is another one. Maybe we go two questions. One question comes from Ahmet İlmi Güler. What do you think about the future of NATO leading by U.S. leadership, under U.S. leadership of Biden as a Democrat president on the relations with Asian countries? Do you expect separate action towards Asia by U.S. and the European Union going on, or multilateral action collectively towards Asia by forming a strengthened alliances between U.S. and the European Union again? Yes, multilateralism.
I must admit, as a person who dedicated like more than 20 years to international security and defense matters, which means NATO in our case, anyway, I must underline it, that there had been a backsliding in the case of the United States to NATO, as far as NATO is concerned. Now, of course, if you ask NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg, he will say that, I mean, after the end of the Cold War, we have the biggest US presence in Europe, like enhanced forward presence and plus other US contributions, pre-positioned material and what have you. And the most ambitious NATO exercises, which is true, I must admit. But I'm talking about the rhetoric and the psychology behind it. True, the United States did participate in the most comprehensive large-scale NATO exercises, and it did send its troops to Europe to reinforce the defense of our allies, like in the Baltics and in Central and Eastern Europe. Fine. It increased its presence throughout the Europe. Fine. But the current US administration under the leadership of Trump did disservice to many issues impinging on the effective implementation of multilateral diplomacy in the context of NATO. That's another reality. So I have nothing to hide and nothing to fear. I'm glad that Trump will be disappearing from the scene as far as NATO is concerned. So I'm not an American citizen. That's for the Americans to decide, and they decided anyway. And I hope, and I can foresee that Biden will play a different role, paying premium to multilateral diplomacy, and introducing a fresh air to NATO, to the alliance, which is important, which embodies the transatlantic bond, which must be preserved in the face of the challenges we face, as I mentioned, like challenges coming from the east, challenges coming from the south. No single nation can address these issues in isolation, including the United States.
Yeah.
And I hope that Biden administration, with its seasoned diplomats, because the U.S. State Department also received heavy damage during the Trump period. I'm not saying it; the Americans are saying it themselves, and experienced diplomats. That's what they are saying, and I think it's true. So I mean, everybody needs kind of a rehabilitation period in terms of improving the psyche within the alliance, which was not good for the last 3-4 years. So I look forward to having a better climate in terms of consultations going on within NATO and improving the agenda that was recently adopted by the alliance. I'm talking about NATO 2030. And I'm sure that there will be a mandate at the mini summit in 2021 for preparing a new strategic concept for the alliance within a year. So in 2022, we will have a new strategic concept, NATO strategic concept. And that will also give fresh impetus to efforts, work, and activities within the alliance. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Now we have 2 questions. There are many questions, but again, I take 2 questions first. One is by Şimal Özdürük. Very good question, by the way, is directed to you. Then one to Ambassador Kovacic. First, to you, Ambassador. In the last meeting of NATO ministers of foreign affairs, a verbal clash between Pompeo and Çavuşoğlu portraying Turkey's isolated position was reported. Arguments arose concerning Pompeo's attitude, whether it is planned sabotage against Biden or natural outcome of recent crisis. What is your opinion about these arguments and Turkey's future positions? Thank you. Şimal, very good question. Congratulations. And Ambassador to Kovacic by Dr. Mustafa Çiçek. Probably you should answer this, Ambassador, because they are your neighbors. The country is concerned here. Mustafa Bey put a very provocative question, I would say, also is having a direct relation to Turkey. The question is, Mr. Ambassador, how much NATO concerns about the quality of democratic systems of members, meaning probably Poland and Hungary also, not only Turkey. So how would you answer this? We go this time reverse way. First, Mr. Ambassador Kovacic should answer, and then you. Please, Mr. Ambassador, you have the floor. You should speak, Mr. Ambassador, yeah.
Thank you. I was just wrestling with the unmuting, so I hope that I'm not mute anymore. Yeah, the question posed to me, which I understand as how much is NATO concerned
about the
quality
of democracy in individual members, including, I think, Hungary and Poland was mentioned. Look, we are all concerned by what happens in our neighboring and allied countries, whether we like it or not. And this is, I think,
they are Visegrad countries also.
the concern may have various forms and manifestations, or even the lack of it, but the fact is that we are all concerned, mutually. So it's for me, it's natural and understandable, and that holds true for Central Europeans, but for this part of the world as well. And the other question, of course, is whether these issues are a matter of a formalized debate. And if you are asking me directly whether these two allies are debated in any sort of organized, institutionalized way, the answer is not. But that you cannot escape some of the developments and that they affect what people do collectively. Yes, and again, one can very easily refer to the NATO 2030 report. You find interesting slogans there, which must not remain slogans on paper, which must have been put into practice, and they have to do with the fundamentals of the Washington Treaty. So let me just quote, and that applies also to Turkey and her neighbors. Allies should renew their collective commitment under Article 1 of the North Atlantic Treaty to settle disputes by peaceful means. This is nothing new under the sun, but the reconfirmation of that in this report certainly will have to be picked up on somehow. And I hope that the deconfliction initiative by SG Stoltenberg, that it will catch up, and we will see positive developments between neighbors, Turkey and Greece. Goes without doubt, that we have such hope and expectation. And come back to the Central Europe, to which the question was aiming at. Look, the situations are different. If I am, for instance, making this comparison between the Aegean and Central Europe, it's different to the effect that whatever domestic political debates in Hungary or Poland, or whatever EU debates on the state of their democracies, whatever such debates there are, it does not affect the collective security and defense commitments. Definitely not directly. While what is happening between two allies, two members of NATO, on the neighborly front, in military sense, does affect the collective defense as such. So that is the defense issues or border issues we have between the Czech Republic and Poland, at worst, entail an unwanted incursion of Polish border guard into the Czech territory by a couple of hundreds of meters in heavy fog. That's our typical border incident. And of course, it's taken rather as a sort of anecdote or like that, and definitely not as a border issue. So, this is the difference which one must see when one is talking about neighborly or related relations and issues of that kind. And also, turning once again to the 2030 report, which I still, as I said, I still have not digested the text. But for instance, this other one: allies should refrain from politically motivated blockages involving matters external to NATO. Again, a very important thesis, which hopefully will be subscribed to by all, but also acted upon. These are the things which keep coming to our agendas and workings, you know, repeatedly. Yeah? And again, this brings you again to the centrality of Article 5. And speaking of NATO and EU, again, I'm simplifying and shortening things, but the two institutions which are key for all of us, I mean, they must never enter into conflict. Not in simple like military terms, but if we take on the one hand the Article 5 of NATO and Article 42.7 of the Lisbon Treaty, I mean, how close or far we are of the two institutions, the two organizations, basically mutually interblocking each other through the disputes on the one hand, you know, of which Turkey knows very much, yeah, Cyprus and related stuff, you know, and then if these clauses are invoked on both sides, we have a paralysis of both, and that is actually the nightmare scenario, and that is also what I understand, rightly or wrongly, was also the message of Macron when he began to speak of the brain death, yeah, in connection with Article 5. And I think that this is also the inputs made by many allies, you know, into the reflection, into the 2030 report, that this must be prevented, because that's the beginning and the end of all of our purposes within a collective defense organization. I mean, this must not be blocked. This is also having to do with the strategic autonomy. I very much understand that this is intriguing for those who institutionally are outside of the EU, but the fair answer is that you don't have any agreed definition of the strategic autonomy. Definitely not to the degree which would be sort of utilizable universally and in all situations. And I can tell you that from the Czech point of view, the strategic autonomy does not amount to collective defense under the aegis of the EU. I mean, that would go beyond the letter of the Lisbon Treaty, and that letter, by the way, has not been, is far from being fulfilled. And for us, as far as we can see, the strategic autonomy on the security side is something which should be basically limited to crisis management, because as we all know from all of the decades-long debates, the moment you go for collective defense, you start duplicating, and this is the sort of split we have to prevent from happening.
Ambassador, thank you very much. But as we know, between Croatia and Slovenia, we have a still border crisis. And I was actually referring closer to the publication by Francis Fukuyama, 2018. He published a book, Identity, and he talks there about the illiberal democracies, what Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban was putting into the discussion, and the recent discussions in Poland, in Hungary, whether these two countries are in the same line with the normative values of the European Union, because the governments there take certain decisions, and not to forget, of course, what is going on in White Russia in general, in the heart of Europe, being not so democratic in the context of European understanding. It is a Russian problem on the one hand, definitely, but it is in the heart of Europe and not far from you. Definitely, this will be also answered by Mr. Fatih Ceylan, Turkish ambassador, concerning the America's position. Probably Mr. Pompeo was putting the last nail to the coffin before he left the office. How would you answer?
Well, thank you. There's no coffin. Right?
Yet.
Yeah. Well, the rationale why I concluded by highlighting that I'm a man of multilateralism was simply because I was expecting such a question. Let me tell you in earnest that I'm not a fan of splendid isolation, which complements my position as a multilateralist. Okay, in the case of the recent NATO foreign ministerial meeting, I read it, of course, from the news, both in the US and European outlets, that there was such a kind of argument between Mr. Pompeo and the Turkish foreign minister. Now, let me tell you something. As I told before, I had been involved in NATO affairs more than 20 years, and there had been such heated rhetoric used in the council meetings at the level of ministers on different occasions. This is not the first time that this is happening, but this is the first time that such an episode was being leaked to the press. It's no good. It doesn't serve the solidarity and unity aspect of NATO. And I think there was a kind of deliberate attempt on the part of some of our allies to give it to the press, which must remain in the halls of the council rather than being addressed in the public at large. Sorry, I mean, there's this aspect of diplomacy, but I see a tendency from time to time to share everything with the public. Sorry, people, this will not be the case, and this should not be the case. There is something called behind-the-scenes diplomacy, and which produces good results from time to time. And this is no way of depicting, both members of the alliance, Turkey and the United States, kind of exchanging some words between themselves. So I disapprove of it. In a broader perspective, if a dispute is emerging or present, you cannot simply blame only one actor. This would be implausible. I mean, to say that this actor particularly is responsible for it. There are actors involved which share the blame. I'm not going to get into the details, because if I do, then I wouldn't be speaking as a diplomat, but as a politician, and I'm not a politician. I'm speaking as a diplomat. But this blame game is dangerous and does not serve the interests of the alliance members. That should not be forgotten. I used to follow Mr. Pompeo's remarks, statements, tweets, and what have you. He's not a particular fan of Turkey anyway. We know that. And why he did it, there could be different reasons and motivations behind it. It could happen. It did happen in the past. Such rather harsh rhetoric, exchange of such harsh rhetoric in NATO. For instance, I referred to the Balkans crisis. In the run-up to NATO intervention, there had been some heat moments within the council room. That is true. And when the United States intervened unilaterally in 2003, for instance, the second Gulf War in Iraq, there were very harsh moments within the council. And even risks. But NATO was able to overcome these divergences. And that is the value added of NATO. as my Czech colleague said, when there is a tension between different members, I think NATO is the place to address such disputes and try to facilitate a way out of it. Facilitate, I say. I've chosen this verb consciously, of course. So it is a platform where you can address such issues. But it's not a platform for such leakage.
Okay.
That's all I can say. Let me add one last sentence. I think when we talk about democratic deficiency, okay, I mean, let's not shy from it. I've read tons of articles written by our American friends, some of whom I know, coming from the diplomatic background, who criticized and who have been criticizing the Trump administration. They were elaborate. Ambassador Nicholas Burns, for instance, together with my dear friend,
the back channels, his good back channels, we read.
Who was my previous U.S. permanent representative, Douglas Lute. Yeah. They prepared a report. I mean, they were themselves criticizing what their country is doing in terms of democratic deficit. I mean, so we should try to bring together all these different, pieces of puzzle and then reach a conclusion. Yeah. We have been facing the rise of populism also in the Euro-Atlantic area, to which we must commit ourselves to kind of get rid of the impacts of this rising populism in different countries within the alliance, including the United States, and pervasive in Europe as well. I think that's a serious challenge. That is another inner challenge as far as the Euro-Atlantic community is concerned. And you cannot simply single out a country saying that in this country there's a democratic deficit. And somebody can come and say, hey, I mean, you have some other challenges in your own country. I'm not trying to advocate anything. I'm just trying to depict a broader picture here. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. You used the term splendid isolation.
Exactly. That's not my term, right?
Yeah, it is the term by Paul Kennedy in his book, The Rise and Fall of Great Powers, meaning for Great Britain that Britain chose splendid isolation in the 19th century. I have another good questions. Mr. Ambassador Kovacek, first question comes to you from Pakistan, by the way. Far away, but it's from Pakistan. The question is, after the operation of Turkey to Syria in 2019, in order to provide her national security, Czech Interior Minister announced to suspend the export of military equipment to Turkey. On the other hand, Mr. Ambassador defined the Czechia's concern from the Russian aggression, and there is a fact that Turkey's military equipment's quality has been proved. For example, Ukraine's rightful combat against Russia in Donbass. So my question is, under what conditions and development, what kind of relations we should expect in future between Turkey and Czechia? This is the first question. And to Mr. Ambassador Ceylan, there is another one question, very interesting also, this by Alican Özçelik. It was a question by Alican Özçelik to you, Mr. Ambassador, and by also Fazıl Shadi to Turkish Ambassador. Given that Russia is a rival of NATO and being political military alliance, one, can NATO allies purchase defense systems from a rival? It means manages being NATO member and purchase 400 missile systems from Russia. Mr. Ambassador Pavacek, first you have the floor. The time for answer.
Unmuting. I hope that I'm heard. Yeah. On the question from our Pakistani colleague. Look, first of all, we in the conversation with President Erdogan, and we reciprocate the interest and ambition to work together, and that's actually natural and desirable for the members, for both Turkey and Czech Republic as members of NATO. So this I can say to this. I mean, speculations I would rather leave aside, and moreover, I think that we are quite constrained by time. So I would leave it at that, unless there is any even more specific aspect to be questioned directly by the poser of the question. So over to you, Professor Bacci.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Okay, let me answer that question on S-400s in a rather brief manner.
Shortly.
Shortly. I mean, there are rules that govern purchase of non-NATO military equipment. But these are basically non-strategic assets and material that we are talking about. There had been cases of that in the past and even very currently. What we are talking here is a strategic system which was not welcome by many of our allies. I know that. Not only the United States, but also other groups of countries within NATO, which have question marks about the purchase of S-100 missiles. It's a long debate, and it seems that it will continue for a while. I think the best option that we have at hand, without causing further serious problems within the alliance, is for Turkey and the United States to come together around the table and try to fix a formula for that, to overcome that issue. When you look at the decisions taken at the level of heads of state and government on at least three occasions, like Brussels Summit 2017, before that 2016 Warsaw Summit, 2018 Brussels Summit again, the decision was taken by NATO to decommission Soviet or Russian originated military equipment, and particularly if it's a strategic asset such as S-400, it would be natural to expect problems arising within NATO, and that's exactly what happened. The United States taking the lead, but I must stress one thing before finishing. That we in the past developed 6 different criteria. These are public, by the way. I mean, this is not something secret, public, including the joint production criterion, one of the criteria, technology sharing, and also the percentage of our local firms, Turkish national local firms, to participate in that joint production. Our allies were not generous on that. Now, when I talk about fixing a formula, a sort of compromise that would, relieve us from that ongoing debate is that I think it would be a much better idea to try to find a formula which would give Turkey opportunities in joint production, technology sharing, and also the participation of Turkish firms in that joint production. And of course, it must also, I mean, also the United States will have to then reverse its decision to exclude Turkey from F-35. I think we should try to kind of develop a compromise formula along those lines. This is important, and we must get rid of this big debate going on, both in Turkey, within the alliance, and also in the United States. That's how I would answer that question.
Now, to both ambassadors, we have 3 questions, both of you, and I would like to ask you as much as possible, short and precise, but we have time. We have extra 10 minutes time. I'll give extra time. First question by Batu Joshkun. To both ambassadors, even after Biden resumes office, do you really believe that European Union-US ties will recover? Increasingly, the European Union is looking into its own member states for security, while post-communist states appreciate the US presence in Europe, the likes of France do not. Czech Republic's ambassador's answer would be important. Then the second question, Arda Mevlütoğlu is an expert on military affairs in Turkey, a young academic, very knowledgeable, and he puts a very specific question. I would like to ask both ambassadors' opinions about PESCO and its effect on NATO's position against Russia. And the last question by Furkan Yılmaz, another able student, sharp-minded. He puts the question, it is said that the size of the problems are faced today is pushing countries to act in a multilateral way. But in this multipolar world and increasing realpolitik, what will be the principle constitute a functioning multilateralism? This is a PhD, by the way. We start with you. Would you like to start with Ambassador? Yeah, Ambassador, please. You have the floor. Povacek, Mr. Ambassador Povacek, you have the floor.
Yeah, well, there is quite an array of questions. On the first one, I think first things first. I think that we are all under obligation to continue working and contributing to the cooperation between North America and Europe. We can talk about it at length. We can devise institutional recipes, but the simple and compelling thing for me is that it's the values we share. It's also history, and it's also the commonality of objectives which should guide us in bridging gaps and overcoming difficulties which are bound to be there, which are of course accentuated by populist policies here, there, everywhere. But we cannot but base ourselves on the centrality of that link, which has been so often quoted also in our debate of today, the transatlantic one, and that's the sort of compass which will always guide us rightly, I believe, when it comes to resolving issues, institutional, say, between NATO and the EU. And it's also the pressure of the rivals, of the strategic competitors, if we want to label them more euphemistically, that actually compels us to this cooperation. So I'm historically optimistic, but that this general recipe does not resolve for you the details which you have to address in a particular situation. I mean, that has always held true, and it will continue to be a challenge for us into the future. So this is my take on it generally. Thank you.
Very good.
Okay. Now let me start with the first question about this EU part. When you look at the evolution of European security and defense policy, such matters will come on the radar of the European Union for the foreseeable future. But I think today's challenge, the magnitude of today's challenges, necessitate that EU and the US work together. They need each other. And this is also important for the transatlantic community. And that should be inclusive, by the way. I mean, this is important, inclusiveness. Because if you kind of try to brush aside certain expectations and needs of any NATO member in the context of NATO-EU relations, that would backfire. Like in our case, it would backfire. So one should be very cautious on that. Try to be as inclusionary as possible, because this is important. That there is this talk about full involvement of non-EU NATO allies. So put it into practice. That's my call, and that would solve many problems in the context of NATO-EU relations. I'm not sure that things will radically change when Biden first comes to power regarding United States and the EU. They need time to restore certain damaged parts of US and Europe relations. I think their first priority will be to address domestic issues and wage an effective war on coronavirus. That should be their first domestic priority, like the priority of many of us, to get rid of this pandemic and get ready and derive our lessons and get ready for the upcoming pandemics. Maybe that's important, and I think that will be priority number one in domestic politics of the United States. And I'm sure that they will also address how to restore US-Europe ties. I'm sure of that, in a better way. There was this question on permanent structured cooperation issue. The structured cooperation was on the agenda of the EU much before, but then they added the word permanent, which raised our eyebrows in Turkey. But what do you mean permanent? I mean, we are talking about avoidance or minimization of duplication of effort between NATO and the EU, and then you are saying permanent. So I raised this question, I remember, in one of the council meetings. Structured cooperation was termed much before. I mean, that was a reality, but when you add the permanent structured cooperation, it could be interpreted differently. And it should not be a conduit for introducing another divergence in the transatlantic community, because if that divergence quote unquote infects NATO and US-Europe relations, I'm sure that Russia will benefit from that. There's no doubt about it. Any bifurcations, divergences, differences of opinion will be highlighted, exploited, used and abused by Russia. There's no doubt about it. So I would recommend to my European colleagues to be cautious in taking this PESCO enterprise forward. and try to find means of including non-EU NATO countries. This is important. Certainly including Turkey in that PESCO project. I know the political hurdles being raised by a number of European EU members, and I hope to see Czech Republic, and now our dear friend Jiří Sedivi is leading European Defense Agency. I worked with him for many years in the NATO Council. I hope that he can also contribute to have more inclusive ways in getting this PESCO endeavor forward. That's my hope. How do you constitute functioning multilateralism? As Professor Baja said, this is really something very academic, but also it concerns realpolitik. That is certainly the case. By believing that you need a transatlantic forum, NATO, by investing in it, and by maintaining solidarity and unity as its main centers of gravity. I mean, I'm talking about in the context of transatlantic community, by the way. There are other ways of improving multilateralism. That has been the driving motto of Europe, the EU, multilateralism. And they coined the term in active multilateralism. We were invited to preparing the first EU strategic concept, you know, in the early 2000s. Turkey was invited, and I participated in those discussions. And then the EU stopped inviting NATO allies, such as Turkey, to such discussions. Now we have global strategy, right? None of us got involved in that. We were only informed that this is what we do. And of course, the ironic thing is that my dear friend Natalie led it. Anyway, I was able to talk to her because of my previous acquaintanceship. But
Natalie Tocci?
Natalie Tocci,
yeah, from Italy.
A very dear friend from Italy.
Yeah.
But we were not invited. That is, you know, that is something. So,
what is the reason? No reason?
That was prepared, I think, in the confined rooms of external relations part of the EU.
She was advisor to.
But I'm sure, of course, you know, the EU members had an access to such discussions, and then they declared it and informed the NATO Council about it. We were able to raise our questions, of course. But again, I mean, the EU also needs multilateralism in an inclusive manner. Please do not give the impression, or do, you know, I'm not talking about the impression, but also the practice of sidelining non-EU NATO members in such endeavors, which are of direct concern for countries like Turkey, in the middle of this arc of instability, starting from the north, coming to the south. If you do it, then we will have a reaction. I mean, and this is not a political reaction. I mean, this is a reaction based on experience. So I think, and I'm sure that our Czech colleagues will help us in this inclusion process, which is also applicable to PESCO, by the way. This is another potential bond of contention between Turkey and that project. I mean, we took part in, you know, A400, for instance. It's a good model, you know, which you can use for different projects that could be developed within PESCO. And I think our EU colleagues know about this. So I stop here.
Very good. So it is 12:40 already, 10 minutes more than as anticipated. But you see how the debate is important for us, for both countries, as well as for the viewers who watch this webinar. We should continue to have this type of discussions also in future. And I thank to both ambassadors for their invaluable contributions. It was a great day in the morning, but afternoon, we will continue with another challenge for Europe. This is about the migration in Europe and in Turkey, and we will have 3 experts talking about this, and we start at 3 p.m. Afternoon. So we have a break now for you to do something else, but after 3 to 5, we have the debate.
Professor Bajit, one final word that I ignored to mention about is that brain death of NATO, this notion.
Yeah.
I challenged it as a former retired diplomat, even prior to the London summit. President Macron said it, which I think is a disservice also to France, which has been contributing to NATO collective defense and deterrence for decades. And he repeated that notion in 2020, following the London summit. I think people around him should brief him more on what NATO means. This will not take him anywhere. Neither will it take France anywhere as a full member of NATO. So if he repeats the same thing, then I shall continue to challenge him as a former diplomat. Thank you.
Perfect. So the last statement was important.
Yes,
sure.
May I still say just 1 or 2 sentences? It's not to claim any last word on the substance, not at all. We seem to have exhausted at least ourselves or the audience, but not the topic. We can continue on that. But let me just assure you that the lunch to which you and your collaborators and also Ambassador Ceylan are cordially invited. We are just deferring it. We are not cancelling it. I mean, the lunch which should have taken place today. Yeah, and let's get back to it and agree on a date as soon as it is practical for everybody, including for the embassy here. And whether it will be still in December or perhaps more likely in January, I think is not that important, for as long as we are all on board. And I will approach you on that one definitely. So this is the last word from me, and also with thanks for this event and that has materialized. Thanks to you once again.
See you then.
Attention.
Yeah, to our audience, I would like to see all of you this afternoon for another interesting challenge and discussion with the cooperation of the Czech Republic. Thank you very much, and see you later on. Bye-bye.